Hope you all are enjoying the Programmatic Summit and beautiful Lake Tahoe. So if I can get a hands for how many people are using a DMP right now? Okay, so a few. So I'm hoping that this will be helpful for those who are considering using a DMP and also for those who are not so sure. So first thing I'll go through today is just a little bit of history of who we are and where my journey began, how I got access and unlocked the DMP, what worked for me, and finally some results. So I'll kick off with a brief video of AARP and our mission.
Our story begins more than 60 years ago inside an abandoned chicken coop where our founder discovered a retired teacher living, no home, no health care. So she said no to this injustice and yes to transforming lives. It's this drive, this compassion that inspired AARP. Today we empower people to choose how they live as they age. We advocate for health and financial security. We strengthen communities everywhere. We are AARP, creating real possibilities.
So I think this captures the mission pretty well. So, little history. We were founded in 1958 by Dr. Ethel Percy Anders, and we actually started out as an association for retired teachers, but that was 60 years ago. Today, we serve the 50-plus community, and we really do a lot. I think there has been a shift in how people age now. People are living longer thanks to modern medicine and technology and advancements in education and awareness about eating healthy, being active, having a healthy lifestyle. And so, you know, people are living longer, which is great. And we provide a lot of different services, but I usually get two reactions. The first reaction is, you guys are an insurance company. I don't need you. We actually are not an insurance provider. We do partner up with insurance providers, but we're not an insurance company. The second is, why are you sending me direct mail? Like Steve mentioned, people get really annoyed with me. I don't send you any mail. I don't work on the direct mail side. But that's not the reaction we want you to have. We want you to have the tools and opportunities to age well and really age on your own terms. I do follow you on the web, though. But we are, you know, a pretty large organization. We're nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we're very customer-centric. We are not revenue-driven, which is really helpful because we can focus on the customer. And because we've been supporting these programs to help the 50-plus, we've grown to over 38 million members. And in a way, it's also a challenge, right? So with any mature audience, you're going to have an inevitable decline. And in order to have this type of association continue with this strong voice and collective power, you're going to really need to continue to grow that customer base and sustain the members that you have. So that's my main challenge, working on the membership acquisition team, is how do I capture new members, but also retain the ones that we have? So I'll talk about when the fun began, when I joined. So before I joined AARP, I had about 10 years of digital marketing experience on the agency side and then also on the private sector side with consumer brands such as Rosetta Stone, Time Life, Taste of Home. And I kind of did a little bit of everything. I spent years in paid search, did affiliates, display, social, mobile. And I joined AARP in January of last year. And basically, the membership team was taking everything in-house. So I had the fun challenge of building out something new using Programmatic to essentially expand and diversify, scale across different networks, using data and testing, and ultimately to acquire more members. But of course, there were challenges along the way with anything. The first thing when I came on board, I noticed that our tags weren't even tagged properly. Pixels weren't placed properly. There was a lot of issues in those areas, and so that had to require a lot of cleanup. The structure of our accounts were in disarray. And I'm very type A, so I like everything very organized and neat. And so I had to redo everything, resetting naming conventions, restructuring campaigns, and then figuring out what type of data was available. And the funny thing is, we actually had a GMP, but nobody was using it. And I definitely wanted to get my hands on it. So I'll talk about getting access and unlocking next. So the first piece was figuring out who the gatekeeper was. This was simple for me just because I had a great boss. He worked at AARP for over 10 years. He knew everyone, and so he pointed me in the right direction. And this was actually, the GMP was controlled, and we use Adobe Audience Manager. And it's controlled by another business unit, and oftentimes DMPs aren't really with the marketing department or with brand. It's usually with like IT or a tech business unit. And so I was brand new, and they probably were like, what is this person trying to do? So I spent a couple of months just trying to build trust and establish rapport. So I set out one-on-one meetings every week, made sure that I was top of mind. And it's really hard at AARP because we just have meetings all day long. So making sure that I was always there and they didn't forget about me. And then the third thing was identifying the data sources, understanding what we had in our accounts and in our databases, and then creating those destinations, server-to-server connections so that we can activate the right data. And for membership acquisition, it's really, really important that we're not targeting our existing members. And some of our campaigns didn't even have suppression lists set up, so that's a lot of media waste. So reducing media waste was a big priority for me so that I could actually use those funds to scale out. The fourth key was really putting together a strategy deck and making sure that my intentions were very clear with use cases. And we have multiple data teams at AARP, very, very siloed. So getting everyone together and then illustrating how I wanted to use the data that we had and how to acquire new data that we didn't have that I wanted to utilize. And this is really important because we're very protective of our data, like everyone else. And the data folks especially, right? It's their job to secure that data. And so being able to make them feel comfortable, then I was concerned as well. I wanted to have audience governance. I wanted to make sure that we weren't abusing the data, making sure that our customers had a good experience. And the fifth thing was really persistence. It took a few months to actually get into the DMP because I was brand new. So definitely had to establish that trust. And I think I put in so many requests with that team that they eventually were like, we'll just give you access, and which was really helpful to me. And I still remain the only marketer who has admin access, so I'm pretty proud of that. So what worked? Okay. So again, data that you have versus data that you want. We had a lot of member data, but we didn't have a lot of prospect data that was easily accessible. So what I was trying to figure out was, how do I get this data in a format that I could use and make sure that it was activated in AAM, and making sure that it was accurate enough as well. So a lot of validation, a lot of time going through making the right connections, and then making sure that we had all of our converter data in one place so that we could learn from it, not only to make first impression lists, but also to create lookalikes to scale. And this really required making sure that we understood the traits of these audiences, gaining insights from them, and then pushing them out to those destinations that we wanted to target. And like I said, suppression lists are really important, and it should be a no-brainer, but it's not. Oftentimes, I've talked to folks who have not suppressed, and so you're wasting a lot of media dollars. This was one of those areas where, I always feel like it should be the first thing that you consider, especially in any sort of acquisition type of marketing. And this really helped us build out this list. I can't say the number specifically, but we increased it by 5 times when we implemented these converter traits into the DMP. And then audience list governance. I'll go over a few tips that I have learned through the process of setting this up. And it was really trying to make sure that I secured my data. It was organized so that I can actually understand what files I'm using so that I'm not misusing that information, but also that nobody else is using my audience list. So I'll go through naming conventions and then overlap, reports, and frequency restrictions. So the first thing is suppressions. We use Adobe Analytics in addition to Adobe Audience Manager. And one of the most simple things you can do is really making sure that your customer profile is merged with your device graph. Nowadays, with so many people using multiple devices, you want to make sure that you have all of those items suppressed. So if they convert on mobile, you're not targeting them on desktop. If they're converting on desktop or tablet, you're not targeting them on mobile. So it really does save you from overexposure and also a better customer experience. You don't want to keep following someone around if they've already converted. Audience file naming, this is kind of where my type A comes in. I get really annoyed when you let the data folks come up with the naming conventions or file names because you'll get jumbled numbers and letters and you're like, what does this mean? I don't want to have to look at a key every time I'm trying to activate an audience list. So what I do typically is I set up a convention so that I see the source, the business unit, the audience category, subcategory, and sometimes even date. So when I go into DBM or DNV 360 now, I can easily tell what audience I'm targeting because oftentimes the source is never correct. It'll just say this platform that you're on, which we know is not right. So, and this also secures my list, right? So if the data folks are in the DMP, they know not to give this list to another business unit who is looking to target members because these are prospects. They are membership acquisition lists that are non-members interested in advocacy or travel or retirement. And so this is really important to keep organized within your DMP and within the marketing platforms that you're in. And then don't be this guy. So Office Space is one of my favorite movies. Bill Lumbergh, what a character. Oftentimes when I'm in meetings with folks about data, and it's interesting being on both sides, being in the DMP side and being on the marketing side, is that I often get folks who are interested in using data, and they're like, I really want to use audiences too. Can I use your list? And I'm like, no, because you're not targeting the same audience. And then they'll say, well, what do you have? And I'm like, well, what do you want? And it just goes into this circular conversation, and it's super annoying. And I have to admit, I was there too before I had access to the DMP. I was like, well, what kind of data do you have? Because I don't know what to ask for if I don't know what's there. But just be detailed in your requests. What they can say is no. Typically what I do is I will have, this is a request sheet that I came up with, really basic and simple for our data folks, the different teams that we work with. And I usually will have a file name that I would like, the source of that data, so we have different databases pulling that database in, and then the type of campaign I'm trying to launch. So for instance, let's say this is a travel campaign. I want to target folks who have gone to the travel site of the site, but not the folks who just go there all the time, but between 3 to 10 visits, because I know that's like the sweet spot, and this is all hypothetical, but similar requests are made. And I know that these prospects are interested in travel, or I would hope they are, and I want to make sure that I can target them with relevant messaging about travel, discounts, or tips, what to pack, things like that. And then making sure that my destinations are clear so that they know either I can activate them or where I want to use them, and then when I want them to be live. And typically most of our traits are rule-based. Some are algorithmic. Typically the lookalike audiences are, but most of them are rule-based, so they're very simple. You can layer in the Boolean rules. So typically mine are prospects, non-members who are interested in travel, et cetera, et cetera. And this helps me with making sure that the landing pages are also very relevant. And overlap reports. So this is one of those very simple features to use in Audience Manager, and I'm sure some of the other DMPs will have a similar feature. But using audience data and looking at what information you have against other segments not only helps you understand whether or not you're targeting the same people, but it also gives you insights about what interest areas they have. So let me give you an example. So when I was looking at all of my audience segments that I created in the DMP, I saw that most of them didn't really have a very high overlap percentage, except for jobs and retirement, which is really interesting because they're kind of, you're either working or you're retired, you would assume. And that was typically how we addressed our audiences on our site, was you either were working or you were retired. However, there was a huge overlap here, which indicates to me that people were actually trying to find work but transition into retirement. So because of that, I could address them differently and give them messaging that is related to that versus, hey, find a job, or hey, retire soon. You can also ask this, you could do this with third-party audiences too. So Audience Manager, like most DMPs or DSPs, have a marketplace where you can tap into third-party audience data sets. And what I typically do is, is I will take my first-party audience and overlap it with third-party audience so that I know I'm getting original data and not a huge overlap. So very simple and straightforward, but so helpful. And also, brands demand this of your data providers. If they're giving you multiple lists with different propensity levels, make sure you're asking for those overlap reports. Otherwise, you might be buying the same data. And what a waste. So last thing is results. So because of all of these optimizations and suppression lists, we had increased impression volume, larger cookie pools, expanded suppression lists, grew our audiences, and ultimately it really led to greater efficiencies and reducing our CPA, and that's the last click CPA, by 33%. And it really helped us grow year over year. So we had about 109% year over year member growth. So of course, this is just the beginning. I think there's a lot more to be done. But you can easily achieve these things by going through and making these small changes and making sure that your DMP is unlocked. Thanks.
Hoan, thank you very much. We have time for questions for Hoan. Since suppression and not overwhelming your existing members was such an important piece, were you able to measure that independent of end results? Were you able to get a sense that you were pestering your existing members less, and was there any direct feedback on that?
Yeah, on some of we did try to isolate it in certain networks to test out, but overall it was really difficult because we were optimizing constantly and putting in more creative refreshes and pulling a lot of levers. But we did see a huge increase in efficiency when we first layered in that suppression list with one of our networks. So it was a great win, and we can't really talk about that because otherwise I would be meeting with legal for a very, very long time.
We don't want that at all. And I know that you don't control direct mail. What sort of, in the DMP, what sort of data do you have, or what sort of crossover data do you have from offline and online interactions with customers?
Sure. So we do have an offline database that we actually are testing into to try to convert into digital. And we are layering in additional data attributes because with offline you only have so much information. And in order to target them online, you need more information. So we layer all of that together. and we are actually launching a cross-channel test on Monday. So we'll definitely let you know how that goes.
Are you to the point where you're doing, I mean, you've got, as you're able to organize your DMP this way and leverage it with your creative, are you doing sequential messaging yet? Since you know how many times you're hitting, your frequency is a real important part of this, are you getting to the point where you're telling a story?
Yeah, that's the ideal. We've started doing that a little bit, but I think we've been constrained with creative because you really do need a good amount of creative to follow up and make sure that we are messaging you appropriately. We do a really good job with that on the retention side because we know if you're 1 month out, 2 months out, or you're considering renewal, we will message you with that type of information and provide you with different premiums. People love our free stuff. I think people love free stuff in general, but people will actually call and demand us for that free day bag or that free travel wallet or whatever. So we do use that in that regard, but I think that's the next step is really getting very sophisticated with that sequential marketing.
Juan, once again, thank you very much. And Juan's here throughout the summit to talk to. We want to thank another one of our sponsors, Datorama, for supporting our next coffee.